What if the greatest collection of human knowledge didn't burn, but simply disappeared? Hidden somewhere between legend and history lies an archive said to contain forgotten civilizations, vanished kingdoms, and secrets that could rewrite everything we know about the past. But why was it lost? Who wanted it gone? And could fragments of its truth still survive today? Stay with us as we uncover one of history's most haunting mysteries. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Archive Lost to History, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into the forgotten past. The wind carries almost nothing across the abandoned ruins except dust. Yet beneath the silence lies a possibility that has fascinated historians for generations. Somewhere in the immense span of human history, countless voices once filled shelves with clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, wax boards, bark manuscripts, bamboo strips, parchment codices, and carefully carved stone inscriptions. They recorded treaties, family names, harvests, eclipses, poems, mathematical discoveries, royal ambitions, forgotten languages, religious ceremonies, maps of landscapes that no longer exist, and observations of stars whose positions have slowly shifted across thousands of years. Most of those voices are gone, not merely hidden, but erased so completely that their absence has become one of history's greatest mysteries. The surviving monuments of ancient civilizations often create the illusion that the past is well preserved. Massive pyramids still rise above desert horizons. Temple columns continue casting long shadows across worn stone pavements. Fortified walls remain standing where kingdoms once guarded rivers and mountain passes. Yet these enduring structures represent only the outer shell of civilizations. Their memory once lived inside archives. Within rooms lined with shelves or packed with baskets and wooden chests, rested the records that explained why cities were built, how governments functioned, what ordinary people feared, and what scholars believed they understood about the world. When those archives disappeared, entire civilizations became strangely incomplete. Archaeologists sometimes compare the surviving evidence of antiquity to scattered pages torn from an enormous book. A single inscription may preserve the name of a forgotten king, while hundreds of years of surrounding history remain blank. A merchant's tablet might survive because it was accidentally baked hard during a destructive fire, while the literature that inspired generations simply decayed into soil. What survives in the record suggests that chance has played an astonishing role in shaping everything modern humanity believes about the ancient world. This imbalance creates a remarkable illusion. Certain civilizations appear unusually well documented because fortune favored the survival of their records. Others seem almost invisible, not because they lacked history, but because history itself vanished with the materials upon which it was written. The difference between fame and obscurity may sometimes rest upon whether a storeroom remained dry for a few centuries longer, whether invaders overlooked a hidden chamber, or whether an earthquake sealed fragile manuscripts beneath collapsed walls before weather could destroy them. Long before the First Empire dreamed of ruling distant provinces, memory itself remained vulnerable. Stories travelled from one generation to another through voices alone. Elders carried histories inside their minds. Priests memorized sacred traditions with extraordinary precision. Skilled storytellers could preserve genealogies extending back dozens of generations without writing a single symbol. Yet every drought, epidemic, migration, or conflict threatened these living archives. If enough people disappeared, entire chapters of human experience vanished with them. The invention of writing transformed that fragile situation in ways few people at the time could fully appreciate. For the first time, knowledge could outlive individual memory. A farmer could record harvests from previous seasons. A ruler could preserve laws beyond a single lifetime. Astronomers could compare observations made centuries apart. builders could leave instructions for future generations. Entire societies gradually began transferring portions of their collective memory from human minds into physical objects. That achievement may seem ordinary today, surrounded by libraries, digital storage, and vast databases, but in antiquity it represented one of the greatest revolutions in human history. Every written mark became a small act of resistance against forgetting. Even so, permanence remained an illusion. Clay tablets could crack. Papyrus absorbed moisture. Ink faded beneath sunlight. Wooden shelves collapsed beneath insects and rot. Libraries depended upon constant care. Archives required organized scribes, stable governments, reliable supplies, peaceful conditions, and generations willing to copy aging manuscripts before they deteriorated beyond recovery. Unlike stone monuments, knowledge demanded continuous maintenance simply to remain alive. This vulnerability explains why historians often speak not only of civilizations that disappeared, but of memories that disappeared even faster. Across the ancient world, scribes occupied an unusual position. They rarely commanded armies or ruled kingdoms, yet they quietly determined what future generations would know. Every document copied by hand represented deliberate effort. Every text left uncopied edged closer toward extinction. The survival of countless ideas depended upon anonymous individuals patiently shaping symbols, one line after another, often working in dim rooms, illuminated only by filtered daylight or flickering lamps. Few of these scribes expected anyone living thousands of years later to read their work. Most recorded ordinary matters, tax accounts, property boundaries, marriage agreements, ship inventories, deliveries of grain, lists of livestock, court decisions, letters requesting supplies. These routine documents rarely attract public imagination, yet together they reveal the rhythm of everyday life more clearly than grand monuments ever could. Sometimes extraordinary discoveries emerge from remarkably ordinary records. A simple administrative tablet may contain the earliest known mention of an otherwise forgotten settlement. A warehouse inventory might preserve evidence of long-distance trade across continents. A letter complaining about delayed shipments can unexpectedly reveal political alliances between distant kingdoms. History often survives not through dramatic declarations, but through practical paperwork never intended to become priceless evidence. Scholars still debate exactly how many archives once existed across the ancient world. The evidence remains incomplete because the disappearance of archives naturally removes the records proving their existence. Entire collections may have vanished without leaving even a single surviving catalogue describing what they contained. It is entirely possible that some of history's greatest repositories remain completely unknown, simply because nothing escaped their destruction. This realization changes the way ancient history is understood. Instead of imagining a continuous narrative stretching from the first cities to the modern world, it becomes easier to picture scattered islands of evidence rising above an immense ocean of silence. Between those islands lie gaps measured not in years but sometimes in centuries. Historians carefully bridge these distances using archaeology, environmental evidence, surviving inscriptions, and comparative analysis, yet many spaces remain impossible to fill with certainty. Popular imagination often searches for one legendary lost library holding unimaginable secrets. Reality appears both less dramatic and far more profound. The greatest archive lost to history may never have been a single building at all. It may have been the combined memory of thousands of archives spread across continents, each preserving unique pieces of humanity's story before time, conflict, climate, neglect, and simple accident gradually erased them one by one. The tragedy is not merely that famous books disappeared. Entire ways of understanding the world disappeared alongside them. Scientific observations may have ended without successors. Local histories may have vanished before neighbouring kingdoms ever learned they existed. Languages fell silent. Religious traditions dissolved. Family histories ended. Countless names spoken proudly during their own lifetimes have not been heard for thousands of years. Yet the mystery refuses to remain entirely silent. Every archaeological excavation has the potential to uncover another forgotten room sealed beneath rubble. Every deciphered inscription adds another sentence to humanity's unfinished autobiography. Every newly discovered tablet reminds researchers that the surviving record is not complete, and perhaps never will be. Somewhere beneath deserts, forests, volcanic ash river sediments, or the foundations of modern cities, fragments of the missing archive may still wait in darkness, preserved not because history intended them to survive, but because chance offered them one final refuge against oblivion. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The search that follows is not simply for lost libraries or forgotten kingdoms. It is a search for the missing memory of civilization itself, assembled piece by piece from whatever time has chosen to spare. The first archive does not begin with shelves filled from floor to ceiling, nor with scholars debating philosophy beneath towering columns. It begins with necessity. Somewhere in the earlier cities of the ancient Near East, where irrigation canals divide fertile plains and grain harvests determine survival, memory grows too large to remain inside human minds alone. Villages become towns, towns become cities, and with every expansion comes another layer of complexity that spoken tradition can no longer manage. Fields must be measured, workers must be counted, livestock must be tracked across changing seasons, temples receive offerings from hundreds of families, rulers demand tribute from distant settlements. The larger society becomes the more urgently it needs memory that cannot forget. Long before writing resembles literature, it serves as an instrument of organization. Small clay tokens representing sheep jars of oil, baskets of grain, and other commodities circulate through early communities. These simple objects allow transactions to be recorded without relying entirely upon spoken promises. Over generations, the system grows increasingly sophisticated. Rather than storing countless physical tokens, scribes begin impressing symbols directly into wet clay. A practical accounting method gradually evolves into one of humanity's greatest inventions. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that writing is born not from poetry, but from administration. The earliest tablets recovered from southern Mesopotamia rarely tell stories of heroes or kings. Instead, they list deliveries, inventories, labour assignments, and agricultural accounts. To modern readers, they may appear surprisingly ordinary, yet they reveal an extraordinary transformation. For the first time, information becomes independent of memory. A message can survive after its author is gone. This quiet revolution changes every institution it touches. Temples no longer depend entirely upon priests remembering decades of offerings. Officials can compare harvests across many years. Construction projects spanning generations become easier to coordinate because plans and measurements remain available long after the original builders disappear. Writing creates continuity beyond the limits of individual lives. As cities expand into kingdoms, archives naturally follow. Every successful government accumulates records faster than it can discard them. Legal judgments establish precedents. Tax obligations require verification. Diplomatic agreements must be preserved to prevent future disputes. Census records help organize military service and labor. Religious calendars synchronize festivals across growing populations. Without written archives, increasingly complex societies risk collapsing beneath the weight of forgotten obligations and conflicting memories. The profession of the scribe emerges from this new reality. Becoming a scribe is neither simple nor common. In many ancient societies, literacy remains limited to a small portion of the population. Learning hundreds of symbols demands years of disciplined training. Students repeatedly copy signs onto clay or papyrus, often producing the same exercises countless times before mastering them. Archaeologists occasionally uncover these practice tablets, complete with corrections and uneven handwriting, offering surprisingly intimate glimpses into classrooms that existed 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Many young apprentices undoubtedly find the work repetitive. Endless copying tests patience more than imagination. Yet these exercises quietly prepare individuals who will become guardians of civilization's memory. A single experienced scribe may oversee thousands of documents during a lifetime, recording events that future historians will one day depend upon without ever knowing the scribe's name. The archive itself gradually acquires a recognizable form. Clay tablets are sorted according to subject region or administrative function. Some carry identifying marks on their edges so they can be found without removing every tablet from storage. Others are grouped inside baskets, wooden boxes, or shelves built specifically for record keeping. Certain archives even develop primitive cataloguing systems, suggesting that administrators already understand a problem familiar to every modern librarian. Information has little value if it cannot be located again. Climate plays a decisive role in determining which archives survive into the present. Dry conditions across parts of Mesopotamia preserve countless clay tablets because the material itself resists decay once hardened. Ironically, destructive fires sometimes improve preservation by accidentally baking unfired tablets into durable ceramic. Documents intended for temporary administrative use become nearly permanent because catastrophe transforms them physically. Elsewhere, the situation proves very different. In Egypt, scribes increasingly favor papyrus made from the reeds growing along the Nile. Papyrus is lighter, easier to transport, and far more convenient for lengthy texts than heavy clay tablets. It supports flowing scripts and allows long scrolls containing religious literature, scientific observations, literary compositions, and government correspondence. Yet papyrus possesses a hidden weakness. Outside exceptionally dry environments, moisture insects and microorganisms slowly consume it. Entire generations of written knowledge can disappear without fire or invasion, simply because organic materials rarely survive the passage of millennia. This uneven preservation creates profound distortions in modern understanding. Scholars often know far more about civilizations that happen to record information on durable materials than about societies whose preferred writing surfaces quietly decayed. The apparent silence of certain cultures may reflect archaeological chance rather than historical reality. Writing also changes how rulers perceive authority. A spoken command fades quickly, but an inscribed decree carries permanence. Laws displayed publicly reinforce political legitimacy. Boundary markers establish ownership across generations. Royal inscriptions celebrate victories intended to outlast the kings themselves. Memory becomes a political resource as much as an intellectual one. Whoever controls the archive increasingly influences how future generations understand the past. Religious institutions recognize the same power. Sacred hymns, ritual instructions, astronomical observations linked to ceremonial calendars and genealogies of priests all require careful preservation. Accuracy becomes essential. A single copying error introduced into an important ritual text might alter ceremonies repeated for centuries. As a result, many scribes develop remarkably disciplined methods of reproduction, checking and comparing texts whenever possible. Even so, small mistakes inevitably accumulate, reminding modern scholars that every surviving manuscript represents part of a long chain of human transmission rather than a flawless original. The archive soon grows beyond administration and religion. Curiosity begins leaving written traces as well. Observers record unusual eclipses, planetary movements, medicinal plants, mathematical calculations, foreign languages, and unfamiliar animals encountered through expanding trade networks. Knowledge itself becomes something worth collecting. This development marks another subtle turning point. Archives no longer exist solely to preserve obligations. They begin preserving ideas. A practical invention gradually evolves into humanity's first great memory institutions, where experience can accumulate instead of disappearing with each passing generation. No single civilization invents this transformation entirely alone. Similar processes unfold across different regions according to local needs and available materials. Bamboo strips carry records in ancient China. Birch bark serves communities farther north. Palm leaves preserve texts across parts of South Asia. Wax tablets become common for temporary notes in Mediterranean societies. Every environment shapes its own solutions, yet all reflect the same underlying realization. Human memory, however remarkable, is finite. Civilization requires something more durable. Still, permanence remains elusive. Every archive depends upon roofs that eventually leak governments, that eventually change caretakers who eventually die, and political systems that may not survive the next generation. Even at the very moment humanity learns how to preserve knowledge outside the mind, it unknowingly creates new forms of vulnerability. The written record can be stolen, censored, neglected, burned, buried, or simply forgotten behind locked doors whose keys disappear. The first archives therefore represent both triumph and fragility. They expand the reach of civilization beyond living memory, yet they also concentrate that memory into places where catastrophe can erase centuries in a single season. As the earliest repositories continue growing, another realization slowly emerges. If knowledge possesses value, rulers will compete to gather it, protect it, and sometimes seize it from their rivals. Before long, archives will become symbols not merely of administration, but of prestige, ambition, and power itself. The first great archives seldom announce themselves with monumental architecture. From the outside, many appear surprisingly ordinary, tucked behind temple courtyards hidden within palace complexes, or occupying quiet administrative buildings, where scribes move through narrow corridors carrying bundles of tablets and rolled manuscripts. Their true importance lies not in impressive walls, but in what those walls protect. Every shelf gradually fills with accumulated memory, and every generation adds another layer to a collection that no single person can fully comprehend. As kingdoms expand across river valleys and mountain passes, rulers begin recognizing that information can be as valuable as armies. A well-maintained archive allows officials to collect taxes more efficiently, resolve disputes over land monitor trade, organize irrigation systems, and communicate across territories stretching hundreds of kilometers. Records become instruments of stability. Without them, governments repeatedly lose track of their own decisions. Nowhere is this transformation more visible than in Mesopotamia. Cities such as Ur, Uruk, Nippur, Mari, and later Nineveh develop administrative traditions that produce astonishing numbers of clay tablets. Archaeologists have recovered tens of thousands of examples, yet these surviving collections almost certainly represent only a fraction of what once existed. Entire archives remain buried beneath unexplored tells, while countless others have undoubtedly been destroyed through erosion, looting, warfare, and simple neglect over thousands of years. Walking into one of these ancient repositories would have revealed an environment very different from a modern library. Instead of rows of printed books, shelves hold stacks of clay tablets arranged according to subject or function. Some are no larger than a human hand, while others approach the size of small paving stones. Their surfaces are covered with tightly packed wedge-shaped impressions, pressed into damp clay using sharpened reed styluses. To modernize, the writing appears almost abstract, yet every mark carries precise meaning understood by trained scribes. Many tablets are surprisingly specialized. One records grain deliveries arriving from nearby villages. Another documents livestock distributed among temple workers. Nearby rests a contract confirming the sale of land, followed by court judgments, diplomatic correspondence, astronomical observations, educational exercises, and hymns honoring local gods. Together they create an astonishingly detailed portrait of ancient society, preserving ordinary routines alongside extraordinary events. The royal palace at Mari offers one of the most revealing examples. Excavations uncovered thousands of tablets preserved beneath collapsed buildings, providing rare insight into diplomacy during the early second millennium before the Common Era. Letters passed between kings discussing alliances, military threats, trade weather conditions, and intelligence gathered from distant regions. Some messages reveal sophisticated political strategies remarkably familiar to modern observers. Others contain practical concerns about supplies transportation and administration. Behind every royal decision stands an archive quietly recording the machinery of government. Farther south, temple complexes function not only as religious centers, but also as economic institutions. Priests supervise extensive agricultural estates, workshops, storehouses, and labor forces. Their archives document everything from brewing beer to weaving textiles, from livestock management to canal maintenance. What appears sacred and administrative often becomes inseparable. Religious authority, economic organization, and written memory reinforce one another. Meanwhile, along the Nile, Egyptian record-keeping develops according to different environmental conditions. Papyrus scrolls replace heavy clay for many purposes, allowing considerably longer texts. Skilled scribes write in elegant columns using brushes made from reeds and inks prepared from soot and mineral pigments. Documents are rolled, tied, labelled, and stored in carefully organised collections. Egyptian archives extend beyond taxation and administration into literature, medicine, mathematics, engineering, and funerary traditions. Instructions for constructing monumental architecture calculations involving geometry, descriptions of surgical treatments, collections of wisdom literature, and elaborate religious texts all circulate through networks of trained officials. Much of this intellectual tradition is known only because a handful of manuscripts survive in unusually favourable conditions. The overwhelming majority has almost certainly disappeared forever. Climate again shapes historical memory in unexpected ways. Egypt's dry deserts occasionally preserve fragile papyrus for thousands of years, while similar documents stored in more humid regions decay almost completely. This accident of geography profoundly influences modern scholarship. Historians sometimes possess detailed knowledge of one location, simply because environmental conditions favoured preservation there, while neighbouring regions leave almost no written trace. Across Anatolia, the Hittite Empire constructs archives that reveal another remarkable dimension of ancient record-keeping. At Hattusa, thousands of cuneiform tablets document treaties, legal codes, diplomatic correspondence, religious rituals, and multilingual texts. Some archives contain copies of foreign documents translated into local languages, demonstrating that ancient scribes actively collected knowledge beyond their own cultural traditions. These collections suggest an increasingly interconnected world. Ideas travel alongside merchants. Diplomatic envoys exchange documents as carefully as gifts. Conquered territories contribute administrative practices to expanding empires. Writing systems influence one another across centuries of contact. Archives become crossroads where diverse traditions meet and mingle. One lesser-known but fascinating detail emerges from these discoveries. Ancient archivists often copied older texts not because the originals were damaged, but because language itself gradually changed. Words fell out of use. Grammar evolved, pronunciation shifted. To preserve understanding, scribes produced fresh versions that contemporary readers could still comprehend. In doing so, they unknowingly became editors of history, deciding which traditions deserved continual renewal and which quietly faded into obscurity. No archive remains static. Every generation reorganizes collections according to changing priorities. New rulers emphasize different achievements. Religious reforms alter which texts receive careful preservation. Administrative systems evolve as territories expand or contract. Even the simple act of moving documents from one building to another introduces opportunities for accidental loss. A misplaced bundle of tablets, insignificant at the time, may represent the permanent disappearance of an entire chapter of history. The Assyrian kings eventually elevate collecting knowledge into an explicit expression of imperial ambition. Centuries later, the famous royal collections assembled at Nineveh include literature scholarly commentaries, omens, medical texts, dictionaries, myths, and astronomical observations gathered from across Mesopotamia. The intention reaches beyond practical administration. Knowledge itself becomes a treasure worthy of conquest. What survives from these collections transforms modern understanding of the ancient world. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving literary masterpieces, reaches the present largely because copies endure within royal archives. Without those preserved tablets, one of civilization's foundational stories might have vanished entirely. The same fragile chain of survival applies to countless other works whose existence depends upon a handful of fortunate discoveries. Yet every surviving text carries an uncomfortable implication. If one epic survives by chance, how many others disappeared forever? For every archive uncovered beneath ancient ruins, how many remain undiscovered or were destroyed long before archaeology existed? Scholars still debate the true scale of this missing intellectual landscape, because the evidence itself has largely been erased. By the height of the Bronze Age, archives have become indispensable components of complex civilization. They support governments, preserve religion, encourage scholarship, facilitate diplomacy, and connect generations through written memory. They represent humanity's growing confidence that knowledge can outlast individual lives. At the same time, they also become increasingly concentrated. Vast amounts of information now rest inside specific palaces, temples, and administrative centers. The greater these repositories become, the more devastating their eventual loss will prove. Unknown to the scribes carefully arranging tablets on wooden shelves, many of the world's greatest collections are already approaching the age of upheaval. Political rivalries intensify, trade networks become fragile, climatic pressures mount across entire regions. The archives continue growing, but so do the forces that will one day threaten everything they contain. The ambition to collect knowledge eventually grows beyond the practical needs of kings and temple officials. As civilizations become larger and more interconnected, some rulers begin imagining something far more extraordinary than an archive serving a single city or kingdom. They envision repositories that gather the accumulated wisdom of the known world itself. Whether such dreams can ever be fully realized remains uncertain, but the pursuit transforms the history of learning. By the first millennium before the Common Era, the ancient Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean are bound together by expanding networks of trade diplomacy, conquest and migration. Ships carry cedar from Lebanon, tin from distant mines, ivory from Africa, spices from Arabia, and precious stones from Central Asia. Alongside these valuable commodities travel something far less visible, yet equally significant. Ideas move from one civilization to another through merchants, priests, diplomats, physicians, astronomers, and scribes who carry written texts across remarkable distances. An archive is no longer simply a place where a kingdom stores its own memory. Increasingly, it becomes a place where foreign knowledge is collected, translated, compared, and preserved. Every conquered territory offers not only new land but also unfamiliar traditions worth recording. Every diplomatic mission returns with information about neighboring peoples. Every caravan arriving from distant regions carries stories, measurements, religious beliefs, medicinal practices, and observations that enrich existing collections. Among the rulers who recognize the value of such knowledge, few become more closely associated with scholarship than the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. Unlike many monarchs remembered primarily for military campaigns, he proudly presents himself as a learned ruler capable of reading complex cuneiform texts. His royal library at Nineveh becomes one of the most remarkable collections ever assembled in the ancient Near East. Modern excavations reveal more than 30,000 clay tablet fragments recovered from the site, though scholars believe the original collection was substantially larger. These tablets cover an astonishing range of subjects. Administrative documents stand beside myths. Medical treatises share shelves with mathematical exercises. Astronomical observations accompany dictionaries, omen texts, rituals, royal correspondence, and literary masterpieces copied from much older originals. One surprising feature of the collection is its deliberate effort to preserve ancient works that were already centuries old. Scribes do not merely record contemporary events. They actively seek older texts from Babylonian cities and other centers of learning, producing careful copies for the royal archive. In doing so, they preserve traditions that might otherwise have disappeared long before modern archaeology uncovered them. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh survives largely because these scribes considered it worthy of preservation. Their decision reaches across more than 2,000 years, allowing modern readers to encounter a story whose earliest origins extend back into the dawn of urban civilization. Yet the survival of one masterpiece inevitably raises a troubling possibility. Countless other works judged less important or simply overlooked may have vanished forever. Even the greatest archive remains selective. Selection is one of history's quietest yet most powerful forces. Every archive reflects human choices. Someone decides which records deserve copying, which damaged manuscripts are worth repairing, which foreign texts should be translated, and which routine documents can safely be discarded once their immediate purpose has passed. These decisions often appear practical at the time, yet centuries later, they determine how entire civilizations are remembered. Meanwhile, another extraordinary center of learning begins taking shape farther west. Along the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, a new city rises after the campaigns of Alexander the Great. Alexandria quickly becomes one of the most ambitious urban projects of the ancient world. Under the Ptolemaic rulers who succeed Alexander, the city grows into a major center of commerce, science, philosophy, and scholarship. At its heart stands an institution whose reputation will eventually eclipse almost every other library in history. The Library of Alexandria occupies an unusual place between documented history and enduring legend. Ancient writers describe enormous collections containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls, although the exact numbers remain heavily debated. Some accounts almost certainly exaggerate, while others may underestimate the scale. The evidence remains incomplete because the library itself no longer survives to resolve the question. What historians generally agree upon is remarkable enough without embellishment. The Ptolemaic rulers invest enormous resources into acquiring text from across the Mediterranean and Near East. Ships entering Alexandria are reportedly searched for manuscripts which are copied by skilled scribes. Original versions are sometimes retained while copies are returned to their owners, illustrating just how determined the rulers are to expand their collection. Whether every ancient account of this policy is entirely accurate remains uncertain, yet the broader objective is well supported. Alexandria seeks nothing less than to gather the intellectual heritage of the known world. Inside its scholarly community, mathematicians refine geometry. Astronomers calculate the movements of celestial bodies. Physicians compare anatomical observations. Geographers attempt to measure the size of the Earth with remarkable precision. Poets edit earlier literary works. Linguists analyze ancient languages. Historians compile chronicles stretching back centuries. Scholars from different cultural backgrounds encounter one another in ways rarely possible elsewhere. Knowledge becomes cumulative. This accumulation represents a profound shift in intellectual history. Earlier archives primarily preserve records for governments' temples and royal administrations. Alexandria aspires to something broader. It becomes a place where knowledge is actively organized, compared, debated, and expanded. Existing texts inspire new discoveries rather than simply recording old ones. One lesser-known achievement associated with Alexandrian scholarship is the development of increasingly sophisticated cataloguing systems. Scholars such as Callimachus are believed to have compiled extensive bibliographic guides listing authors and their works according to subject. Although these catalogues themselves survive only in fragments and references, they suggest that librarians already confront a challenge familiar to every modern research institution. A collection without organization risks becoming unusable regardless of its size. The scale of copying required to sustain such an archive is staggering. Papyrus scrolls wear out through repeated use. Ink fades. Fibers become brittle. Maintaining a major library requires continuous reproduction of aging manuscripts. Teams of scribes spend countless hours producing fresh copies before older versions deteriorate beyond recovery. This relentless labor reveals an often overlooked truth. Ancient libraries are not passive storehouses. They are living systems that survive only through constant human effort. Every generation must actively preserve what the previous generation created. If political support weakens or financial resources disappear, decline begins almost immediately. Other great collections emerge throughout the ancient Mediterranean as well. Pergamon develops an impressive library rivaling Alexandria in prestige. Temples continue preserving religious literature. Royal courts maintain administrative archives alongside scholarly collections. Across different cultures, the written record grows denser with every passing century. Yet beneath this remarkable flourishing lies an invisible vulnerability. The more civilization succeeds in concentrating knowledge into celebrated institutions, the more it risks catastrophic loss if those institutions fail. Fire warfare, political upheaval, economic decline, environmental change, or simple neglect can now erase not merely local records but centuries of accumulated scholarship gathered from across multiple civilizations. Ironically, the greatest triumph of ancient learning also creates one of its greatest weaknesses. Humanity has learned how to preserve memory beyond individual lifetimes, but much of that memory now depends upon the continued survival of surprisingly few places. The shelves continue filling. New scrolls arrive from distant ports. Scribes sharpen their reeds and prepare fresh ink. Scholars compare manuscripts copied from lands they may never personally visit. To those working within these magnificent repositories, the future likely appears secure. Their collections seem vast enough to outlast kingdoms. History, however, is already moving toward an age when roads become dangerous, empires begin to fracture, and the great exchange of knowledge across continents starts to falter. The archives stand at the height of their influence, unaware that the forces capable of unmaking them are gathering beyond the horizon. The shelves of the ancient world never remain still. Every archive depends upon movement long before it depends upon storage. A tablet cannot preserve knowledge until someone carries it from the scribe's hand to the storeroom. A scroll cannot influence distant scholars until merchants or diplomats transport it across mountains and seas. Every great collection is therefore the visible end of an invisible network, stretching across thousands of kilometers, linking civilizations that often speak different languages, worship different gods, and fight different wars. Knowledge travels much more slowly than armies, yet it often survives far longer. Long before formal libraries begin competing for prestige trade routes, quietly weave together the intellectual landscape of the ancient world. Caravans leaving Mesopotamia carry more than textiles, metals, and grain. They transport scribes familiar with multiple writing systems, officials carrying diplomatic correspondence, physicians preserving medicinal recipes, and merchants who gradually become unexpected messengers between cultures. Every journey creates opportunities for ideas to cross political borders that armies cannot permanently control. The great rivers play an equally important role. The Nile, the Euphrates, the Tigris, and later the great waterways of Asia function as moving corridors of information. Boats loaded with agricultural goods often carry government records, tax accounts, legal decisions, and religious texts. River transport is cheaper and more reliable than overland travel, making waterways natural arteries through which archives continually replenish themselves. Along the Mediterranean coast, maritime commerce expands these networks even further. Merchant ships connect Egypt with Cyprus, the Levant, Anatolia, mainland Greece, southern Italy, North Africa, and eventually territories reaching toward the western Mediterranean. Each harbour becomes not merely a marketplace, but also a point where stories, measurements, maps, astronomical observations, and unfamiliar customs circulate alongside commercial goods. Modern archaeology occasionally uncovers remarkable evidence of this exchange. Shipwrecks resting beneath the sea preserve cargoes that reveal astonishingly complex trading systems. Although organic writing materials rarely survive underwater inscriptions on amphorae, seals, weights, and surviving tablets demonstrate that commerce depends heavily upon written documentation. Contracts, inventories, customs records, and correspondence accompany valuable shipments across dangerous waters. Every successful voyage expands the archive of civilization. Diplomatic missions create another pathway for knowledge. Kings exchange gifts to strengthen alliances, yet luxury objects are not always the most valuable offerings. Medical expertise, astronomical observations, legal traditions, engineering techniques, and religious texts frequently travel between royal courts. Skilled scribes capable of reading foreign languages become indispensable intermediaries, translating unfamiliar documents into forms local rulers can understand. One lesser-known example emerges from the diplomatic correspondence discovered at Amarna in Egypt. Hundreds of clay tablets preserve letters exchanged between Egyptian pharaohs and neighbouring rulers during the Late Bronze Age. These messages discuss marriages between royal families, requests for military assistance, complaints about delayed shipments, negotiations over territory, and exchanges of precious gifts. Perhaps most surprising is the language used. Many of these letters are written not in Egyptian but in Akkadian, which serves as the diplomatic language of much of the ancient Near East. Just as Latin would later unite scholars across medieval Europe, Akkadian allows rulers from different cultures to communicate efficiently across political boundaries. The existence of such correspondence reveals an international community far more interconnected than many modern observers imagine. Archives preserve not only local memory but also international relationships. Translation soon becomes one of civilization's most important intellectual activities. Every translated document extends the life of knowledge beyond its original cultural setting. A medical text copied into another language may continue influencing physicians centuries after the original tradition declines. A legal code may inspire reforms in distant kingdoms. Astronomical observations made in one region become valuable to scholars living thousands of kilometers away. Translation, however, is never entirely straightforward. Words rarely carry identical meanings across different languages. Religious concepts, legal traditions, measurements, and poetic expressions often resist direct comparison. Ancient translators must constantly balance accuracy with comprehension, occasionally adding explanations or adapting unfamiliar ideas for new audiences. Modern scholars sometimes detect these subtle adjustments by comparing surviving versions of the same text, revealing that even careful preservation inevitably introduces gradual change. Knowledge, therefore, evolves as it travels. Religious communities contribute enormously to these exchanges. Pilgrims visiting major sanctuaries carry sacred traditions home with them. Priests correspond with one another across considerable distances. Temples commission copies of important ritual texts from respected centers of learning. Certain myths spread widely, adapting themselves to local customs while retaining recognizable core narratives. The movement of scientific knowledge proves equally remarkable. Babylonian astronomical observations influence neighboring cultures. Egyptian mathematics contributes to architectural achievements far beyond the Nile Valley. Medicinal plants identified in one ecological region gradually become known elsewhere through expanding commercial networks. Practical innovations often travel quietly, carried by craftsmen and specialists rather than celebrated philosophers. Maps evolve through similar processes. Contrary to popular imaginations, ancient cartography rarely attempts to represent the entire globe with modern precision. Most surviving maps serve practical purposes, identifying fields, canals, trade routes, administrative boundaries, or nearby settlements. Yet as exploration expands, geographical understanding slowly accumulates. Every expedition returns with fresh observations. Every merchant corrects previous assumptions about travel times, river courses, mountain passes, or coastal harbours. Archives absorb these corrections. Generations of scribes compare old records with new information, gradually refining humanity's understanding of the world. Some earlier mistakes disappear. Others persist surprisingly long because respected authorities continue copying outdated descriptions. The archive becomes both a repository of knowledge and a record of changing assumptions. No civilization accomplishes this process alone. Phoenician sailors contribute maritime expertise across the Mediterranean. Persian administrative systems connect enormous territories through efficient communication networks. Greek scholars collect observations from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond while adding their own philosophical inquiries. Later Roman administrators preserve legal traditions inherited from earlier civilizations, even as they develop extensive archives of their own. Each generation unknowingly depends upon countless earlier scribes whose names are almost entirely forgotten. The survival of these interconnected networks remains astonishingly fragile. Trade depends upon political stability. Translation requires educated specialists. Archives need funding. Roads require maintenance. Harbours must remain secure. A prolonged drought reducing agricultural production can weaken government finances. Economic decline affects scribal schools. Fewer trained copyists mean fewer manuscripts reproduced before older versions deteriorate. Small disruptions accumulate. The Bronze Age demonstrates this vulnerability with particular clarity. During periods of prosperity, letters move regularly between distant kingdoms. Luxury goods circulate alongside diplomatic correspondence. Archives expand steadily. Yet when regional instability increases, these carefully maintained connections begin weakening. Fewer caravans complete their journeys. Merchant fleets avoid dangerous waters. Royal courts focus increasingly upon survival rather than scholarship. Knowledge still exists, but its movement slows. This slowing matters enormously because archives depend upon continual renewal. Damaged manuscripts require replacement. Foreign discoveries must be incorporated into existing collections. Administrative records accumulate without interruption. If communication falters for too long, the intellectual exchange sustaining major repositories gradually begins to contract. Scholars still debate exactly how rapidly these changes unfold in different regions. The evidence remains incomplete because declining archives naturally produce fewer surviving records documenting their own deterioration. Nevertheless, archaeology consistently reveals that flourishing centers of learning are closely tied to wider systems of trade diplomacy and political stability. When those wider systems begin showing signs of strain, archives quietly become more vulnerable than anyone living at the time fully realizes. The shelves remain full. Scribes continue writing. Ships still arrive in busy ports. Yet beneath the appearance of continuity, the foundations supporting the world's great repositories are beginning to shift. The roads carrying knowledge across continents have always been delicate threads. Soon many of those threads will begin to break, and the archives that depend upon them will discover how quickly civilization can forget what it once believed would never be lost. The disappearance of an archive rarely begins with flames. Popular imagination often envisions ancient knowledge vanishing in a single dramatic night shelves, collapsing beneath towering fires, while priceless manuscripts drift upward as ash. Such scenes certainly occurred on occasion, but archaeology presents a more complicated reality. Most archives do not perish in moments of spectacle. They fade through years of instability, interrupted routines, shrinking resources, abandoned buildings, changing governments, and ordinary neglect. By the time the final documents disappear, the process has often been unfolding for decades. This slower tragedy makes the loss even more difficult to recognize. Every archive depends upon countless acts of maintenance that are almost invisible when they succeed. Roofs must be repaired before rainwater reaches the shelves. Rodents must be kept away from storage rooms. Insects have to be controlled before they consume papyrus and parchment. Clay tablets require orderly shelving so they can still be found when needed. Damaged manuscripts must be recopied while enough trained scribes remain to perform the work. None of these tasks attracts the attention given to kings or battles, yet together they determine whether civilization remembers or forgets. When political systems weaken, these quiet responsibilities are often the first to suffer. A kingdom facing repeated crop failures has little money to spare for libraries. Officials concentrate on feeding populations, paying soldiers, repairing irrigation canals, or defending vulnerable frontiers. Copyists are dismissed. Schools train fewer scribes. Buildings receive only emergency repairs. An archive may continue functioning outwardly, but the invisible processes sustaining it begin slowing almost immediately. Climate sometimes accelerates this decline. Tree ring records, pollen samples, lake sediments, and other environmental evidence suggest that parts of the eastern Mediterranean and Near East experience periods of prolonged drought during the late second millennium before the Common Era. Scholars continue debating the exact regional impacts and timing, yet many agree that environmental stress places enormous pressure on agricultural societies. Harvest failures reduce tax revenues. Food shortages encourage migration, Competition for resources intensifies. Political stability becomes increasingly fragile. An archive has little defense against these broader forces. If grain shipments stop arriving, scribes eventually go unpaid. If administrators abandon provincial centres, records remain locked inside neglected storerooms. If villages are deserted, local archives lose the communities that once maintained them. Documents survive only as long as living institutions continue valuing them. The Late Bronze Age collapse illustrates this interconnected vulnerability with remarkable clarity. Between roughly the 13th and 12th centuries before the Common Era, many major kingdoms across the eastern Mediterranean undergo dramatic upheaval. Palaces are destroyed, trade networks fragment, cities are abandoned or greatly reduced in size. Diplomatic correspondence that had once flowed regularly between rulers becomes increasingly scarce. No single explanation fully accounts for this transformation. Scholars point instead toward a combination of interacting pressures. Climatic instability may have reduced agricultural productivity in some regions. Earthquakes affected certain settlements. Internal rebellions weakened governments. Maritime raiders, often grouped under the label of the Sea Peoples in Egyptian records, contributed additional disruption. Economic systems dependent upon long-distance trade became increasingly fragile as transportation routes failed. The archives standing inside palace complexes prove especially vulnerable because they are tied directly to centralized administration. At sites such as Ugarit, located on the coast of present-day Syria, archaeology preserves one of history's most haunting moments. Excavators uncover archives containing letters written during the city's final days. Some messages urgently request military assistance. Others describe hostile fleets appearing offshore. Administrative routines continue even as danger approaches, suggesting that officials still hope established systems can survive. They do not. The city is destroyed, and many of its archives are buried beneath collapsed buildings. Ironically, that destruction helps preserve portions of the written record. Clay tablets protected beneath rubble survive until modern excavations recover them thousands of years later. The contrast is striking. The government disappears. The scribes vanish. The city falls silent. Yet the tablets endure because catastrophe accidentally shields them from weather and later disturbance. Elsewhere, however, archives based primarily on papyrus leave almost nothing behind. Buildings burn completely. Organic writing materials decay. Future generations may never realize such collections existed at all. This uneven preservation profoundly shapes modern understanding of the ancient world. Historians know some societies through thousands of surviving documents, while others remain almost invisible because their preferred writing materials simply failed to survive. War adds another layer of complexity. Victorious armies do not always destroy archives deliberately. Sometimes they seize administrative records because they contain valuable information about taxation, land ownership, population, or resources. A conquering ruler often benefits more from inheriting an archive than from burning it. At other times, destruction occurs indirectly. Fires spread through crowded urban districts during sieges. Collapsing roofs crush shelves. Water used to extinguish flames ruins manuscripts that escaped burning. Looters searching for precious metals ignored documents entirely, leaving them exposed to rain and decay after buildings are abandoned. Even peaceful political transitions can threaten archives. A new dynasty may reorganize government according to different priorities. Older records lose immediate administrative value. Storage rooms become overcrowded. Officials decide which documents deserve preservation and which can be discarded. Decisions made for practical reasons inadvertently erase historical evidence that future generations would consider priceless. Language itself becomes another silent destroyer. As spoken languages evolve, older texts gradually become more difficult to read. Fewer students learn ancient scripts. Specialists capable of interpreting obsolete writing systems become increasingly rare. An archive filled with unreadable documents slowly transforms from a useful institution into an inaccessible relic. The evidence remains incomplete, but several ancient civilizations appear to experience precisely this problem. Administrative reforms introduce new writing conventions, political centers shift, educational traditions weaken. Within a few generations, older records may still exist physically while becoming functionally invisible because almost no one can understand them. The archive has not disappeared. Its meaning has. Religious change occasionally produces similar consequences. Temples dedicated to declining belief systems lose financial support. Priestly schools close. Ritual texts once copied with extraordinary care cease being reproduced. Existing manuscripts continue aging until natural deterioration finally destroys them. None of these losses requires dramatic violence. Time alone can accomplish what invading armies never attempt. Perhaps the most unsettling realization emerging from archaeology is how ordinary many of these processes appear. Civilizations rarely recognize that they are entering an age of forgetting. People continue marrying, farming, trading, governing, and worshipping. Scribes still sharpen reed pens. Officials still organize records. Children still begin learning to read. The archive seems secure until almost imperceptibly it no longer is. Centuries later, archaeologists excavating collapsed walls encounter scattered fragments that once formed part of coherent collections. A handful of surviving tablets hint at rooms now empty. Broken seals indicate cabinets long since rotted away. Carbonized scraps of papyrus suggest libraries whose contents can never be reconstructed. Every fragment raises the same haunting possibility. If this small remnant survived, how much vanished beside it? The answer can never be calculated with certainty. Scholars estimate, compare, and infer, but the true scale of humanity's missing archive remains unknowable, precisely because its disappearance erased the evidence needed to measure it. By the time history realizes what has been lost, the silence has already become permanent. Fire has always occupied a strange place in the history of knowledge. It gives humanity warmth, light, and the ability to shape clay into durable tablets that survive for thousands of years. The same force that accidentally preserves some archives can erase others almost completely. Few elements reveal the fragile balance between preservation and destruction more clearly. Yet the historical record suggests that fire alone is rarely responsible for the disappearance of civilization's memory. More often it becomes the final act in a much longer story of decline. No lost library illustrates this complexity more vividly than Alexandria. For centuries, popular culture has imagined a single catastrophic blaze consuming the entire library of Alexandria in one unforgettable night. The image is dramatic, memorable, and emotionally satisfying. A great center of learning stands at its peak before suddenly vanishing in an ocean of flames. Unfortunately, history refuses to fit so neatly into that narrative. Scholars still debate exactly how the library disappeared because no surviving contemporary account provides a complete description of its final destruction. Instead, the evidence points toward a gradual sequence of setbacks extending across generations. One possible episode occurs during Julius Caesar's campaign in Alexandria, in the 1st century before the Common Era. Ancient sources suggest that fires associated with military operations spread into parts of the harbour district. Some later writers claim that stored scrolls were destroyed while others remain silent on the matter. The exact scale of any damage remains uncertain, and historians continue disagreeing about how directly the famous library itself was affected. Even if losses occurred, they almost certainly did not end the institution. Later references indicate that scholarly activity in Alexandria continues long afterward. Libraries require constant maintenance, and the famous collection appears to survive in altered forms despite political instability. This continuity suggests that any single disaster fails to erase the entire archive immediately. Instead, decline appears cumulative. Successive wars weaken royal patronage. Economic pressures reduce resources available for copying manuscripts. Administrative priorities shift as empires rise and fall. Religious and political transformations alter which texts receive protection. Buildings require repairs that may no longer be funded. Collections become dispersed across different locations. Eventually, the institution loses the continuous support necessary to remain one of the world's greatest centers of learning. Its disappearance, therefore, resembles erosion more than explosion. This pattern repeats elsewhere throughout history. The Library of Pergamon, often considered Alexandria's great rival, flourishes under the Attalid dynasty in western Anatolia. Its scholars assemble impressive collections, encourage literary research, and contribute to the development of parchment as an important writing material. Yet changing political circumstances eventually reshape its fate as well. Portions of its holdings are reportedly transferred elsewhere, according to later traditions, though the details remain debated. Regardless of the exact sequence, the lesson remains consistent. Libraries rarely exist independently of political power. When rulers invest in scholarship, collections expand. When governments weaken or priorities change, archives gradually contract. Religious transformation introduces another layer of complexity. Throughout antiquity, temples preserve enormous quantities of written material connected to ritual practice, astronomy, administration, education, and local history. As belief systems evolve, some temples lose influence while others gain prominence. New religious communities sometimes inherit older collections, preserving portions, while neglecting others that no longer seem relevant. Contrary to popular myths, deliberate destruction of books certainly occurs at various moments in history, but it represents only one part of a much broader process. Far more manuscripts disappear because no one copies them before they wear out. This quiet reality is easily overlooked. A papyrus scroll may survive only a few centuries under normal conditions before becoming too fragile for continued use. If scribes reproduce it faithfully, its contents continue living through new copies. If no copy is made, the text effectively dies, even though no one intentionally destroys it. Literary extinction often happens in silence. Historians estimate that an overwhelming majority of ancient Greek literature alone has been lost. The same pattern almost certainly applies across many other civilizations. Works admired during their own lifetimes survive only through brief quotations preserved by later authors. Entire philosophical schools vanish except for scattered references written by their rivals. Histories documenting forgotten kingdoms disappear, while chronicles discussing more influential empires remain in circulation. Selection steadily reshapes the surviving record. Roman libraries offer another revealing example. By the height of the Roman Empire, public and private collections exist throughout major cities. Wealthy families maintain impressive personal libraries. Government archives preserve legal documents across vast territories. Military administrators record logistics with remarkable efficiency. Yet these repositories depend upon the stability of imperial institutions. As political fragmentation spreads across parts of the Western Roman Empire during late antiquity, many urban centers decline. Public buildings fall into disrepair. Educational systems become more localized. Some libraries survive within religious communities, while others gradually disappear as maintenance becomes increasingly difficult. Once again, the archive fades rather than vanishes instantly. One of the greatest misconceptions about historical preservation is the assumption that books naturally survive unless destroyed. The opposite is true. Books naturally disappear unless someone continually preserves them. Every surviving manuscript therefore represents a chain of deliberate human decisions extending across generations. A monk copies an aging text before it crumbles. A scholar transports manuscripts away from a threatened city. A librarian repairs damaged bindings. A collector rescues neglected scrolls from abandoned buildings. Countless anonymous individuals quietly interrupt the natural process of decay. Whenever that chain breaks, loss begins almost immediately. Archaeology occasionally reveals astonishing moments where disaster accidentally preserves what ordinary stability would have erased. At Herculaneum, buried beneath volcanic material during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, in 79 of the Common Era, carbonized scrolls survive inside a luxurious villa. Heat transforms them into fragile black cylinders that appear almost impossible to read. For centuries they remain largely inaccessible. Only with modern imaging technologies do researchers begin recovering portions of their hidden texts without physically unrolling them. These advances demonstrate that archives once considered permanently lost may still contain recoverable knowledge waiting for future techniques. Such discoveries remind historians to remain cautious about declaring any mystery completely solved. The evidence remains incomplete because archaeology continues uncovering unexpected archives in places once thought exhausted. Desert caves preserve forgotten manuscripts. Sealed jars protect religious texts. Buried administrative centers yield thousands of tablets after lying undisturbed for millennia. At the same time, every remarkable discovery emphasizes how much has vanished forever. If one hidden room can transform scholarly understanding of an entire civilization, what might have existed inside the countless repositories that left no trace at all? The answer lies beyond recovery. Fire warfare, political upheaval, environmental change, economic decline and neglect all contribute to the disappearance of archives. Yet behind every individual cause stands a deeper truth. Knowledge survives only when societies actively value its preservation. Once that commitment weakens, even the greatest collections begin moving toward silence. The flames remembered in legend therefore symbolize long after the scribes have disappeared and the roofs above their archives have collapsed. The earth begins performing a different kind of preservation. Wind carries dust into abandoned rooms. Earthquakes seal chambers beneath fallen stone. Floods deposit layers of silt across forgotten buildings. Volcanic ash blankets entire settlements in suffocating silence. What once appears to be complete destruction sometimes becomes an unexpected act of protection. The greatest discoveries in archaeology often begin with accidents rather than certainty. A farmer strikes an unusually hard object while ploughing a field. Construction workers uncover buried walls beneath a modern city. Shepherds seeking shelter enter an unfamiliar cave. Treasure hunters searching for valuables instead expose forgotten storerooms filled with objects whose true worth lies not in gold but in information. Again and again, the missing archive reveals itself only when chance interrupts ordinary life. Every excavation begins with the hope that another fragment of humanity's memory still survives beneath the soil. Yet archaeologists know that the process is painfully slow. Ancient archives rarely emerge as complete collections waiting neatly arranged on shelves. More often they appear as scattered pieces mixed with collapsed masonry, broken pottery, animal bones, ash, and centuries of accumulated debris. A single room may contain thousands of fragments requiring years of careful cleaning, cataloguing, conservation, and interpretation before their significance becomes clear. One of the earliest great archaeological surprises comes in the 19th century, when excavations across Mesopotamia begin uncovering cities that had largely vanished from historical memory. Beneath towering mounds formed by thousands of years of rebuilding, researchers expose palaces, temples, administrative buildings and archives containing immense numbers of clay tablets. The discoveries transform historical understanding almost overnight. Before these excavations, many names known from ancient texts remain uncertain or controversial. Cities such as Nineveh, once remembered primarily through classical writings and religious traditions, suddenly become physical realities. Walls emerge from the earth. Palaces reappear. Most importantly, the archives begin speaking again. Thousands of cuneiform tablets are transported to museums where scholars spend decades attempting to decipher their contents. At first, the strange wedge-shaped signs seem almost impossible to understand. Gradually, through careful comparison with multilingual inscriptions and painstaking linguistic analysis, forgotten languages begin revealing themselves. Entire civilizations recover their voices. Administrative records unexpectedly become some of the richest historical sources ever discovered. Lists of grain deliveries reconstruct ancient economies. Court documents reveal systems of justice. Diplomatic correspondence exposes complex international politics. School exercises demonstrate how children learn to write. Medical texts preserve treatments combining careful observation with beliefs that today appear unfamiliar, but nevertheless illuminate ancient approaches to health. Perhaps the greatest surprise is not how different these societies appear, but how recognizable many aspects of daily life remain. Parents worry about inheritance. Merchants complain about delayed shipments. Officials argue over taxes. Builders struggle with construction schedules. Judges settle disputes between neighbors. Teachers correct careless students. Across 4,000 years, ordinary human concerns remain remarkably familiar. Another extraordinary archive emerges at Ebla in present-day Syria. Excavations uncover approximately 17,000 clay tablets dating to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. Many are discovered exactly where they fall, when wooden shelves collapse during the destruction of the palace. This detail proves unexpectedly valuable. Because the shelves fall forward, archaeologists can often reconstruct the original arrangement of the archive by studying the positions of the scattered tablets. It is as though a librarian's organizational system survives despite the destruction of the building itself. Researchers suddenly gain insight not only into what ancient people write, but also into how they organize knowledge. The Ebla tablets reveal extensive commercial networks reaching across much of the Near East. Inventories list goods arriving from distant regions. Diplomatic correspondence records alliances and negotiations. Administrative documents demonstrate highly sophisticated systems of government operating centuries earlier than many scholars once assumed. Every newly translated tablet slightly reshapes humanity's understanding of the ancient world. Meanwhile, in Anatolia, excavations at Hattusa continue uncovering the archives of the Hittite Empire. Thousands of texts emerge from palace and temple complexes preserving treaties, royal decrees, myths, ritual instructions, legal traditions, and multilingual dictionaries. One remarkable treaty discovered there eventually becomes famous as one of the earlier surviving international peace agreements. Its existence reminds historians that diplomacy possesses a far longer history than previously imagined. Even in periods often remembered primarily for warfare, rulers devote considerable effort to negotiation, compromise, and carefully documented political relationships. The archive expands history beyond battles. It reveals administration, cooperation, education, science, religion, and everyday life. Sometimes archaeology preserves archives in even stranger ways. At Vindolanda, near the northern frontier of Roman Britain, anaerobic soil conditions prevent the normal decay of thin wooden writing tablets. Instead of clay or papyrus, these documents consist of small wooden sheets covered with ink. Under ordinary circumstances, they would have vanished centuries ago. Instead, they survive. The letters preserved there offer unusually personal glimpses into frontier life. Soldiers request supplies. Officers organize military logistics. Families exchange invitations to celebrations. One tablet contains what is widely regarded as the earliest surviving handwritten document by a woman in Britain. Such discoveries remind researchers that archives preserve emotions alongside administration. The most humble note can illuminate history as powerfully as the grandest royal inscription. Technological advances continue expanding archaeological possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar allows researchers to identify buried structures without immediate excavation. Satellite imagery reveals ancient roads, canals, and settlement patterns invisible from the ground. Airborne laser scanning penetrates dense vegetation, exposing forgotten cities hidden beneath forests. Artificial intelligence increasingly assists scholars by identifying damaged characters on inscriptions, reconstructing broken texts, and comparing fragments scattered among museums worldwide. Documents separated for more than a century sometimes prove to be adjoining pieces of the same original tablet. Even so, technology cannot overcome every limitation. Organic materials lost to decay remain permanently absent. Entire archives consumed by moisture leave no readable trace. Many ancient cities now lie beneath modern urban centers where extensive excavation is impossible. Political instability restricts research across numerous archaeological regions. Looting continues, removing artifacts from their original contexts, destroying valuable information even when objects themselves survive. Every discovery, therefore, arrives alongside renewed awareness of what remains inaccessible. Scholars still debate how many archives remain buried across the ancient world. The evidence suggests that countless sites await excavation, yet the overwhelming majority of humanity's lost written heritage almost certainly disappeared long before archaeology developed the methods needed to recover it. This uncertainty defines modern historical research. Every new excavation answers long-standing questions while creating entirely new ones. A handful of recovered tablets may reveal forgotten rulers whose existence had never been suspected. A damaged inscription may preserve the only surviving reference to an otherwise unknown language. A sealed storeroom may contain administrative records transforming the chronology of an entire civilization. The archive lost to history is therefore not entirely lost. Fragments continue emerging from beneath deserts, river valleys, volcanic deposits, and ruined cities. Each recovered document pushes back the boundaries of silence just a little farther. Yet every fragment also reminds humanity of a humbling truth. The pieces now resting in museums and research laboratories represent only the smallest surviving portion of a written world that was once unimaginably larger. For every archive that chance allows archaeology to recover, countless others have almost certainly disappeared so completely that even their existence can no longer be proven, something larger than physical destruction. They represent the moment when civilization loses the ability or the willingness to carry its own memory forward. Long before the last scroll turns to ash, the archive has already begun slipping beyond history's reach. Not every archive is truly lost because its buildings collapse or its manuscripts decay. Some disappear in a quieter and more unsettling way. The documents remain physically intact, resting safely inside temples, tombs, caves, or buried storerooms, yet no one alive can understand what they say. The writing survives. The language does not. At that moment, an archive enters a different kind of silence, one created not by destruction, but by forgotten knowledge. Few experiences in archaeology are more humbling than standing before a perfectly preserved inscription that refuses to reveal its meaning. The symbols remain sharp after thousands of years. The material itself survives remarkably well. Every line suggests careful composition by a writer who expected future readers to understand every word. Yet the chain connecting author and reader has been broken for centuries. The archive still exists, but its voice has become inaccessible. This silence has repeated itself many times throughout history. Ancient Egypt provides one of the most famous examples. For centuries after the decline of pharaonic civilization, hieroglyphic inscriptions continued covering temple walls, monuments and tombs across the Nile Valley. Travellers admired their beauty and complexity, but almost no one could read them. Scholars proposed countless interpretations, many imaginative but unsupported. Some believed the symbols represented mystical secrets rather than a true writing system. Others imagined they functioned purely as sacred decoration. The inscriptions waited patiently while generations misunderstood them. Everything changed with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799. The inscription contained the same decree written in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Because Greek remained understood, scholars suddenly possessed a crucial bridge connecting the familiar to the forgotten. Even then, decipherment did not happen overnight. Researchers spent decades comparing names, grammatical structures, repeated phrases, and symbolic patterns. Jean-François Champollion eventually demonstrated that hieroglyphs represented a sophisticated writing system, combining phonetic signs with symbolic elements. Once this breakthrough occurred, the silence of ancient Egypt began lifting with astonishing speed. Temples spoke again. Royal decrees regained meaning. Religious texts revealed complex beliefs. Administrative records illuminated daily government. Personal letters exposed ordinary human lives. An archive silent for more than a millennium slowly returned to history. The decipherment of cuneiform followed a similarly remarkable path. Across Mesopotamia, thousands of clay tablets entered museums during the 19th century, yet their wedge-shaped impressions remained unreadable. Progress depended heavily upon multilingual inscriptions, such as the Great Inscription at Behistun, where the same royal proclamation appeared in several different languages. By carefully comparing repeated names and grammatical structures, scholars gradually unlocked the scripts. Entire civilizations previously known only through scattered references suddenly emerged as independent historical voices. Babylonians described their own achievements. Assyrians recorded their own campaigns. Sumerians revealed traditions reaching back toward the beginnings of urban civilization. Without decipherment, these archives would have remained little more than beautifully patterned clay. Translation transformed them into history. These successes naturally encourage optimism, yet not every script has yielded its secrets. Linear A remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Used by the Minoan civilization on Crete during the Bronze Age, the script survives on clay tablets, ritual objects, and administrative records. Researchers understand many of the individual signs because of similarities with the later Linear B script, yet the underlying language itself remains unidentified. This creates an unusual situation. Scholars can often pronounce the words without knowing what those words actually mean. It resembles reading an unfamiliar language aloud while understanding almost none of its vocabulary. The archive exists. The language remains hidden. The evidence suggests that Linear A probably records the language of the Minoans before the arrival of later Greek-speaking populations, but no single explanation fully accounts for its linguistic relationships. Without bilingual inscriptions comparable to the Rosetta Stone, progress remains frustratingly slow. The Indus Valley civilization presents an even greater challenge. Thousands of seals, pottery fragments, and other objects preserve short sequences of symbols used across one of the world's earliest urban civilizations. Cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro demonstrate sophisticated planning, drainage systems, standardized weights, and extensive trade networks. Yet the writing associated with this remarkable society remains undeciphered. One major difficulty lies in the inscriptions themselves. Most surviving examples contain only a handful of symbols rather than lengthy texts. Such brevity makes identifying grammar, vocabulary, or repeated narrative structures extraordinarily difficult. Scholars continue debating whether the symbols represent a complete writing system, a more limited form of notation, or something occupying a middle ground between the two. The evidence remains incomplete. Without longer texts or bilingual inscriptions, every proposed decipherment has failed to achieve broad scholarly acceptance. As a result, one of humanity's greatest early civilizations remains strangely silent despite abundant archaeological evidence. Its streets are visible, its architecture survives, its craftsmanship is admired, its words remain largely inaccessible. Elsewhere, the Maya script tells a far more hopeful story. For many years, researchers misunderstood much of Maya writing, believing it consisted primarily of religious symbols and calendrical notation. Gradually, especially during the 20th century, breakthroughs in decipherment revealed a far richer system, combining phonetic and logographic elements. Suddenly, monuments began describing historical rulers, political rivalries, dynastic marriages, warfare ceremonies, and everyday governance. Ancient cities recovered individual personalities. Kings regained their names. Dates became meaningful. Entire historical chronologies emerged from monuments that had stood silently in tropical forests for centuries. Each successful decipherment demonstrates how dramatically historical understanding can change. An undeciphered archive is like an unopened room filled with unknown treasures. Once its language becomes readable, centuries of silence may disappear almost overnight. Yet every triumph also highlights the immense scale of what remains unknown. Dozens of ancient languages survive only in fragments. Some are known from a few inscriptions. Others appear only as isolated names preserved in foreign texts. Many almost certainly vanished without leaving any readable evidence at all. Language itself proves astonishingly fragile. A political collapse interrupts education. A new administrative system replaces older traditions. Children grow up speaking different languages from their grandparents. Within surprisingly few generations, writing systems once understood by thousands may become mysteries requiring centuries of scholarly effort to recover. Archives therefore depend not only upon physical preservation, but also upon cultural continuity. Books cannot truly survive if no one remembers how to read them. Modern technology offers intriguing new possibilities. Machine learning assists researchers by identifying statistical patterns within undeciphered scripts. High-resolution imaging reveals faded inscriptions invisible to the naked eye. Three-dimensional scanning preserves damaged tablets digitally before further deterioration occurs. Vast international databases allow scholars worldwide to compare inscriptions that were once scattered across distant museums. Still, computers cannot replace missing evidence. No algorithm can decipher a language without sufficient surviving examples. No software can reconstruct manuscripts that completely decayed 2,000 years ago. Every technological advance operates within the limits imposed by history itself. The archive lost to forgotten languages therefore remains suspended between hope and uncertainty. Some scripts will almost certainly yield their secrets in the future. Others may never do so. Every newly deciphered inscription reminds humanity that silence is sometimes temporary. Every script that continues resisting interpretation reminds us that portions of the ancient world still exist beyond the reach of complete understanding. The shelves may survive, the tablets may endure, the ink may remain visible, yet until the language speaks again, the archive continues waiting in silence, preserving answers to questions that history has not yet learned how to ask. Even when an ancient archive survives and its language can be read, another loss often remains impossible to overcome. The books themselves are gone. Historians may know their titles, quote a sentence copied by a later author, or encounter a passing reference praising a famous work that no longer exists. It is like seeing the shadow of a mountain after the mountain itself has disappeared. This absence defines much of humanity's intellectual history. The surviving literature of antiquity often gives the impression of completeness, because the works that endure have become so influential. Homer's epics, portions of Greek tragedy, Roman histories, Egyptian wisdom, literature, Mesopotamian myths, biblical texts, and many philosophical writings continue shaping modern culture. Yet these surviving works represent only a small fraction of what once filled the shelves of the ancient world. Scholars estimate that the overwhelming majority of classical literature has vanished. The exact percentage can never be calculated because many missing books are known only through brief references made by other writers. Sometimes an author casually mentions consulting a history that no longer survives. A philosopher criticizes arguments contained in another treatise that has disappeared. A poet praises an earlier masterpiece whose verses are now entirely lost. These fleeting references resemble footprints crossing a landscape after the traveller has vanished. One of the greatest losses involves ancient historical writing itself. Many historians of the Greek and Roman worlds describe events stretching back centuries before their own lifetimes. They often rely upon earlier chronicles, official records, temple archives, local histories, and eyewitness accounts that no longer exist. Modern readers therefore experience ancient history through several layers of survival. Imagine a historian writing today while quoting a book published 500 years ago. If the modern work survives but the older source disappears, future readers still receive valuable information, yet they lose the opportunity to compare interpretations, verify details, or discover what the earlier author actually intended. This pattern repeats constantly throughout antiquity. Much of what is known about the earliest periods of Greece comes through authors writing centuries after the events they describe. Roman historians frequently cite older annals now lost forever. Egyptian king lists survive only because later copies preserve fragments of much older records. Every generation inherits an incomplete archive, and unknowingly passes an even smaller one to the next. Science suffers similar losses. Ancient astronomers spend generations observing planetary movements, eclipses, and seasonal changes. Physicians record treatments, symptoms, surgical techniques, and medicinal plants. Engineers describe machines capable of lifting enormous stones, pumping water, or measuring distances with remarkable precision. Some of these works survive. Many do not. The writings of Archimedes provide an illuminating example. Several of his mathematical works endure, revealing astonishing insights centuries ahead of their time. Others survive only because medieval scribes unknowingly preserve them beneath later religious texts in reused parchment manuscripts known as palimpsests. Modern imaging techniques have gradually recovered portions of these hidden writings. Without such fortunate circumstances, significant parts of Archimedes' work might have vanished completely. This discovery reminds historians that the surviving archive often depends upon extraordinary accidents. Medical knowledge presents another striking case. The physician Galen writes hundreds of treatises during the Roman period. Many survive and profoundly influence medicine for more than 1,000 years. Yet ancient sources indicate that his total output is even larger than what reaches the present. Some works disappear during antiquity itself, others are known only by title. How many observations, experiments, and clinical descriptions vanish alongside them remains impossible to determine. Literature proves even more vulnerable. Only 7 complete tragedies by Sophocles survive today. Ancient records indicate that he probably writes well over 100 plays. The difference is staggering. Modern audiences admire one of history's greatest playwrights through less than 1/10 of his dramatic output. The same pattern affects countless other authors. Entire schools of poetry disappear. Epic cycles filling the gaps between famous myths are reduced to summaries. Comic plays celebrated during their own lifetimes survive only as isolated quotations. The archive grows steadily smaller with every passing century. Selection rather than deliberate destruction often drives this process. Copying manuscripts by hand requires enormous labor. Every generation must decide which texts deserve the effort. Popular works are reproduced repeatedly. Specialized treatises receive fewer copies. Books falling temporarily out of fashion become increasingly rare. Eventually, only a single manuscript may remain. If that final copy is damaged, misplaced, or neglected, the work effectively disappears from history. The process resembles biological extinction. A species with millions of individuals survives ordinary disasters. A species reduced to one isolated population faces constant risk. Books follow remarkably similar patterns. The fewer copies that exist, the greater the chance of permanent loss. Religious change contributes additional complexity. Some texts continue being copied because they support new educational traditions. Others gradually lose readers. Works no longer considered useful remain untouched on aging shelves until insect moisture or simple deterioration complete their disappearance. Contrary to popular imagination, censorship alone explains only part of this transformation. Far more books vanish because no one actively preserves them. The evidence remains incomplete, yet surviving library catalogues occasionally reveal astonishing numbers of missing titles. Ancient scholars compiling bibliographies sometimes list hundreds of works by authors whose writings have almost entirely disappeared. These catalogues function like maps of a landscape that no longer exists. They remind modern historians that today's understanding rests upon a remarkably narrow foundation. One lesser-known example involves Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in Greek during the Hellenistic period. His history of Babylonia draws upon ancient temple records that are themselves largely lost. Today, Berossus survives only through quotations preserved by later writers. The original history disappears. The earlier temple archives upon which he relies disappear as well. Modern knowledge therefore depends upon fragments of fragments. The chain of preservation becomes astonishingly fragile. Archaeology occasionally reverses these losses in unexpected ways. At Oxyrhynchus in Egypt, enormous ancient rubbish dumps preserve hundreds of thousands of discarded papyrus fragments. The dry climate prevents complete decay. Researchers continue assembling broken pieces into readable texts more than a century after excavations begin. Lost poems reappear, previously unknown plays emerge, private letters illuminate everyday life, official documents reconstruct local administration. The city unintentionally creates one of history's richest archives simply because its inhabitants throw away written material in unusually favourable environmental conditions. What people considered worthless becomes priceless. Such discoveries encourage optimism, yet they also reveal the scale of what remains missing. For every recovered fragment, thousands of books almost certainly vanished without leaving recognizable traces. Entire philosophical traditions may be represented today by a handful of quotations preserved by opponents. Scientific observations accumulated across generations may survive only as indirect influences upon later scholars. Local histories documenting communities, languages, customs, and landscapes disappear so completely that modern archaeology sometimes uncovers cities whose names remain unknown. The archive lost to history is therefore not merely a collection of destroyed buildings, it is a missing intellectual universe. Its absence shapes every attempt to understand the ancient world. Historians continually distinguish between what survives, what is inferred, and what has disappeared beyond recovery. Every newly discovered manuscript slightly enlarges the surviving record. Every reference to a lost work reminds us that the greatest library humanity never sees may be the one that once existed only in memory, before time gradually erased almost every shelf. History occasionally behaves with extraordinary generosity. After centuries of silence, when scholars begin accepting that certain texts have almost certainly vanished forever, the earth sometimes opens just enough to prove them wrong. A sealed cave, a forgotten storeroom, a buried villa, or an abandoned monastery unexpectedly preserves documents that no one imagined could still exist. These discoveries are exceptionally rare, but when they occur, they remind humanity that the archive lost to history is not entirely beyond reach. The Dead Sea surrounded by cliffs and desert plateaus offers one of the most remarkable examples. In the middle of the 20th century, a Bedouin shepherd searching for a stray goat throws a stone into a cave. Instead of hearing the dull sound of rock striking earth, he hears pottery breaking. That simple accident leads to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the modern era. Inside caves overlooking the Dead Sea lie thousands of manuscript fragments preserved within sealed jars. The dry desert climate has protected them for nearly 2,000 years. Together they become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Their importance extends far beyond religion. The collection contains biblical manuscripts, community rules, commentaries, hymns, calendars, legal texts and writings that illuminate a remarkable intellectual world existing during a transformative period of Near Eastern history. Some manuscripts are centuries older than any previously known copies of the same texts, allowing scholars to compare how traditions evolve through time. Perhaps even more importantly, the scrolls demonstrate that entire libraries can survive under the right environmental conditions. The archive is not preserved because someone carefully maintains it generation after generation. It survives because it is hidden. Sometimes concealment proves more effective than continuous use. A similar lesson emerges from Egypt, where the dry climate repeatedly rescues written material that would have disappeared almost anywhere else. Near the town of Nag Hammadi, another unexpected discovery changes historical scholarship forever. A collection of ancient codices buried in a sealed jar preserves dozens of early Christian and Gnostic writings, unknown or previously known only through hostile references written by their opponents. Before the discovery, historians understand certain religious movements almost entirely through critics describing them. Suddenly those communities begin speaking in their own voices. The archive restores balance. Instead of relying solely on second-hand descriptions, scholars can examine original texts, compare beliefs directly, and reconstruct intellectual traditions once believed permanently lost. The discovery illustrates an important principle. History often becomes distorted not because surviving evidence is false, but because it is incomplete. Every newly recovered archive adds perspectives that were previously missing. Sometimes those perspectives confirm established understanding. Sometimes they complicate it. Occasionally they overturn long-standing assumptions altogether. Volcanic disasters create another unexpected path to preservation. When Mount Vesuvius erupts in 79 of the Common Era, the Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum disappear beneath volcanic deposits. Thousands perish. Buildings collapse beneath ash and mud. For the people living there, the catastrophe represents unimaginable tragedy. For archaeology, it becomes an extraordinary time capsule. At Herculaneum excavations uncover what is now known as the Villa of the Papyri. Within its rooms lie hundreds of carbonized scrolls. At first glance, they appear hopelessly destroyed. The papyrus has been transformed into brittle black cylinders resembling pieces of burned wood. Attempting to unroll them physically often causes catastrophic damage. For centuries, researchers believe much of the collection will remain unreadable forever. Then technology changes the situation. Advanced imaging techniques, including high-resolution X-ray scanning and sophisticated computer analysis, begin detecting faint differences inside the tightly rolled scrolls. Without opening them, researchers gradually recover portions of hidden texts. Each successful reading represents something extraordinary. A voice silent for nearly 2,000 years speaks again. The process remains slow and technically demanding, yet it demonstrates that archives previously considered inaccessible may still contain recoverable knowledge waiting for future innovations. This possibility excites archaeologists around the world. How many sealed collections still remain beneath collapsed buildings? How many damaged manuscripts will become readable through technologies not yet invented? The evidence remains incomplete, but history repeatedly shows that assumptions about permanent loss should be made cautiously. Sometimes the archive merely waits for the appropriate tools. Unexpected discoveries are not limited to famous libraries. Across Central Asia, dry desert conditions preserve wooden documents, textiles, and manuscripts along sections of the Silk Road. In northern Europe, waterlogged deposits occasionally protect wooden writing tablets that normally would decay within decades. In the Andes, frozen mountain environments preserve offerings and organic materials with astonishing clarity. Each environment preserves different aspects of the human story. Nature destroys relentlessly. Nature also preserves selectively. One of the most remarkable examples of accidental preservation comes not from royal palaces but from ancient garbage. The enormous rubbish mounds at Oxyrhynchus continue yielding papyrus fragments after more than a century of excavation. Residents discard tax receipts, school exercises, personal letters, shopping lists, legal contracts, poems, plays, and official notices. Because the desert climate prevents rapid decay, ordinary waste becomes an unparalleled historical archive. The discoveries reveal countless details absent from monumental inscriptions. Children practice handwriting. Families exchange birthday greetings. Merchants argue over payments. Neighbors settle property disputes. Teachers assign homework. Doctors prescribe treatments. Daily life, often invisible within royal histories, suddenly becomes vivid and immediate. These humble documents remind historians that civilization is sustained not only by kings and generals, but by ordinary people whose written records rarely receive lasting attention. Modern archaeology increasingly recognizes the value of such seemingly insignificant material. A broken receipt may reveal local tax systems. A fragment of a shopping list identifies foods consumed by ordinary households. An invitation to dinner preserves names that appear nowhere else in history. Every surviving scrap contributes another thread to humanity's fragmented memory. Yet each remarkable discovery also emphasizes how much remains missing. For every sealed cave preserving manuscripts, countless caves remain empty. For every buried villa protecting scrolls, thousands of libraries decay beneath ordinary weather. For every desert preserving papyrus, humid climates quietly erase organic writing within generations. Archaeological success depends heavily upon exceptional circumstances. This reality encourages humility. The ancient world almost certainly produces far more books, archives, letters, maps, scientific observations and literary works than modern scholars will ever recover. The surviving record is not representative. It is accidental. Even so, every recovered archive reshapes history in meaningful ways. New texts refine chronologies. Fresh inscriptions identify forgotten rulers. Recovered correspondence reveals previously unknown diplomatic relationships. Ancient commentaries explain difficult passages in older works. Linguistic discoveries illuminate extinct languages. The archive slowly expands again, not to its original size. That is impossible, but enough to remind humanity that history remains unfinished. Beneath deserts, forests, volcanic deposits, and the foundations of modern cities, countless fragments still lie hidden. Most will never be found, some inevitably will. And every time another forgotten manuscript emerges from darkness into light, it carries the same quiet message across thousands of years. The past has not finished speaking. It is simply waiting for someone to listen carefully enough to hear what still survives. Every generation inherits the temptation to imagine that history disappears through one overwhelming catastrophe. It is an attractive explanation because it offers simplicity. A single invasion burns every library. One empire collapses and knowledge vanishes with it. A great flood sweeps away civilization's memory in a single season. Such narratives satisfy the imagination, yet the surviving evidence points towards something both more ordinary and more profound. Humanity does not lose its archives once. It loses them repeatedly. Across thousands of years, countless local disasters overlap until they resemble one immense absence. Historians continue debating the relative importance of different causes, because no single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of so much written knowledge. Every civilization experiences its own sequence of events. Some archives perish during warfare, others slowly decay beneath leaking roofs. Some become unreadable after languages change. Others remain buried beneath abandoned cities until modern archaeology uncovers them. The archive lost to history is therefore not one mystery. It is thousands of mysteries layered together. One influential explanation emphasizes the fragility of complex civilizations themselves. Large archives require prosperous economies capable of supporting trained scribes, builders, librarians, administrators, and teachers. They depend upon trade routes supplying writing materials, stable governments, funding institutions, and educational systems, producing new generations of readers. Once enough parts of that system weaken simultaneously, preservation begins failing. The process resembles maintaining a vast irrigation network. Every canal requires regular care. Every gate must function. Every embankment demands repair. Neglect enough small components, and eventually the entire system begins collapsing. Archives behave in much the same way. Another perspective focuses less upon destruction than upon selection. Throughout history, societies continuously choose which knowledge deserves preservation. Those choices are rarely malicious. They are practical. Limited resources require prioritization. Copying manuscripts by hand consumes enormous time. Shelf space remains finite. Educational traditions emphasize certain texts while ignoring others. Religious institutions preserve works supporting their beliefs. Governments retain records serving administrative needs. Everything else becomes increasingly vulnerable. Over centuries, these countless practical decisions gradually reshape humanity's surviving memory. A third explanation highlights geography. Some regions simply preserve written material better than others. Dry deserts protect papyrus. Volcanic ash seals buildings. Waterlogged soils preserve wood. Stable caves shelter fragile manuscripts. Humid forests, by contrast, rapidly consume organic materials through insects, fungi, bacteria, and moisture. The difference is dramatic. Two neighboring civilizations may produce comparable quantities of literature. One leaves thousands of surviving manuscripts. The other leaves almost none. Modern understanding then risks mistaking preservation for historical importance. Scholars remain acutely aware of this danger. Archaeological visibility is not the same as cultural significance. Civilizations whose archives disappear may once have possessed intellectual traditions every bit as sophisticated as those better represented in the surviving record. Political ideology introduces another layer of complexity. New rulers often redefine national identity. Previous dynasties become less worthy of celebration. Official histories emphasize recent victories while minimizing earlier rivals. Administrative reforms replace obsolete record systems. Older archives gradually lose immediate relevance. Most disappear not through deliberate censorship, but because successive generations stop consulting them. Memory slowly contracts. Even technological innovation contributes unexpectedly to historical loss. The adoption of new writing materials occasionally renders older formats obsolete. Fresh administrative methods replace earlier systems. Alphabetic scripts gradually displace more complicated writing traditions in certain regions. Simplification increases literacy, yet may also reduce the number of specialists capable of reading ancient documents. Progress and forgetting sometimes advance together. One lesser-known example appears in ancient Mesopotamia itself. For centuries, cuneiform remains one of the world's most sophisticated writing systems. It records literature, mathematics, astronomy, law, diplomacy, religion, and commerce across multiple languages. Yet by the early centuries of the Common Era, relatively few people continue mastering its thousands of signs. Alphabetic writing proves faster to learn for many purposes. Educational priorities shift. Eventually, the last trained readers disappear. The tablets remain buried beneath ruined cities. The knowledge survives physically. The ability to understand it does not. Only in the 19th century do scholars begin recovering the lost script. Nearly 2,000 years pass between the final ancient reader and the first modern decipherment. That extraordinary gap illustrates how quickly cultural continuity can vanish. Popular culture occasionally proposes more dramatic explanations. Legends speak of hidden libraries concealed beneath deserts, secret chambers preserving forbidden wisdom, or advanced civilizations whose knowledge is intentionally suppressed. Such stories possess undeniable appeal. The idea that somewhere a complete archive still waits untouched is deeply compelling. Archaeology, however, offers little support for these sweeping claims. Hidden rooms certainly exist. Sealed collections continue being discovered. Previously unknown manuscripts still emerge. Yet every genuine discovery reinforces the same pattern. The evidence is fragmentary, incomplete, localized. No excavation has revealed a single repository containing the total lost knowledge of the ancient world. Instead, archaeologists repeatedly uncover small surviving islands scattered across an immense sea of absence. This conclusion may seem less romantic than legendary lost libraries. In reality, it is even more astonishing. Imagine thousands of archives spread across continents, each preserving unique regional traditions, scientific observations, family histories, local literature, administrative records, religious beliefs, and artistic achievements. Now imagine centuries of independent losses gradually erasing most of them. The resulting silence would appear exactly as it does today: vast, irregular, filled with isolated survivors rather than complete collections. The archive lost to history becomes not one building but an entire vanished ecosystem of knowledge. Modern historical research increasingly embraces this broader perspective. Instead of searching for a single explanation, scholars examine interactions. Climate influences agriculture. Agriculture affects political stability. Political stability shapes education. Education determines literacy. Literacy sustains archives. Archives preserve memory. Every connection matters. Breaking enough links eventually transforms flourishing civilizations into archaeological sites. This systems approach also explains why some societies recover after crises while others do not. If educational traditions remain intact, archives can be rebuilt. If scribes continue training students, manuscripts can be recopied. If governments restore stability, institutions gradually recover. Where multiple systems collapse simultaneously, recovery becomes far more difficult, sometimes impossible. The archive therefore reflects resilience as much as intelligence. Civilizations do not preserve knowledge merely because they create it. They preserve it because generations continually choose to maintain it despite war, famine, political change, economic hardship, and environmental uncertainty. Perhaps the greatest lesson emerging from this long history is that forgetting is rarely intentional. Most people living through periods of decline believe they are protecting what matters most. They repair what they can, copy what remains, save the books within reach, teach whoever is willing to learn. They simply cannot preserve everything. Centuries later, historians encounter the consequences of those impossible choices. A handful of surviving manuscripts stand in place of entire literary traditions. Fragments substitute for complete archives. Broken inscriptions replace living languages. The evidence remains incomplete, yet one conclusion grows increasingly clear. Humanity's greatest archive is not lost because a single catastrophe destroys it. It disappears because time subjects every civilization to countless ordinary pressures that together prove far more powerful than any one dramatic event. The silence surrounding the ancient world is therefore not the echo of one fire. It is the accumulated sound of thousands of forgotten rooms slowly closing their doors. Although countless archives have disappeared, their influence has not. Knowledge has an unusual ability to survive even when the documents that first recorded it are gone. Ideas migrate from one manuscript to another, from one civilization to the next, from one language into another. A text may vanish completely while its discoveries continue shaping generations that no longer remember its author. The archive fades, but its echoes remain. This quiet transmission explains one of history's greatest paradoxes. Humanity has lost most of the ancient world's written record, yet much of modern civilization still rests upon foundations laid by those forgotten collections. The evidence often appears in unexpected places. A legal principle embedded in a modern judicial system may trace its ancestry through Roman law to even older traditions preserved in Mesopotamian administrative records. A mathematical method refined by Greek scholars may itself build upon observations gathered centuries earlier in Egypt or Babylon. Agricultural practices, systems of measurement calendars, and astronomical calculations frequently carry layers of accumulated knowledge stretching back far beyond the surviving manuscripts that describe them. The chain is rarely complete. Instead, it resembles a river flowing through many landscapes. Individual drops disappear. The current continues. Astronomy offers one of the clearest examples. For generations, Babylonian observers carefully record the movements of planets, eclipses, and seasonal changes. Their measurements accumulate across centuries, allowing increasingly accurate predictions of celestial events. Later scholars working in the Greek world inherit portions of this observational tradition, combining it with new mathematical approaches. Many of the original records disappear. The influence survives. When medieval and later European astronomers build upon classical works, they unknowingly inherit observations whose earliest foundations reach much farther into the ancient Near East than surviving manuscripts alone might suggest. Medicine follows a similar path. Ancient physicians observe symptoms, test herbal remedies, perform surgeries, and compile practical experience generation after generation. Some texts survive intact, others disappear after influencing later compilations. A treatment recorded by a Roman physician may preserve knowledge first developed centuries earlier in Egypt. An Arabic medical encyclopedia may incorporate Greek works that themselves draw upon even older traditions. The archive becomes invisible. Its contents remain active. Language itself preserves remarkable traces of forgotten archives. Many words describing astronomy, mathematics, commerce, agriculture, and administration carry histories extending across multiple civilizations. Borrowed vocabulary often reveals earlier exchanges invisible in surviving literature. A single technical term may have crossed deserts, mountain ranges, and seas long before reaching the language in which it is eventually recorded. The document vanishes. The word remains. Architecture also remembers. Builders often rely less upon written instruction than upon apprenticeship and accumulated practice. Yet behind those traditions frequently stand manuals, measurements, and engineering principles once carefully preserved in archives. The precise methods used to construct monumental buildings are not reinvented independently each generation. They are transmitted, sometimes orally, sometimes through demonstration, sometimes through written guides now lost. Even when the manuals disappear, the buildings continue demonstrating their effectiveness. The same phenomenon appears in navigation. Ancient sailors gradually accumulate detailed knowledge of winds, currents, seasonal weather, coastlines, and stars. Much of this expertise circulates through practical instruction rather than surviving books. Yet written sailing directions almost certainly accompany these traditions. Most are gone. Their influence survives every successful voyage that builds upon earlier experience. Religious traditions preserve perhaps the most visible echoes of vanished archives. Sacred texts copied continuously across centuries often incorporate far older material originating in earlier oral or written traditions. Commentaries explain difficult passages, interpretations accumulate. Liturgical practices preserve memories whose earliest documentary forms may no longer exist. Every copied manuscript therefore represents both preservation and transformation. It carries forward what previous generations choose to remember. Historical memory behaves in much the same way. Medieval chroniclers frequently quote ancient authors whose original works later disappear. Renaissance scholars recover manuscripts copied in monasteries centuries earlier. Modern historians compare these surviving witnesses attempting to reconstruct texts from scattered descendants. The archive resembles a great family tree whose oldest branches have been cut away. Enough remains to suggest the original form, never enough to recover it completely. One fascinating example involves maps. Very few ancient maps survive in their original form. Those that do often appear surprisingly simple compared with modern cartography. Yet geographical knowledge continues expanding across generations. Roman surveyors preserve measurements inherited from earlier traditions. Islamic geographers combine classical learning with fresh observations gathered across expanding trade networks. Later European mapmakers build upon both. Each generation redraws the world using information inherited from archives that are themselves gradually disappearing. The map changes. The accumulated knowledge persists. Modern archaeology occasionally identifies these hidden continuities. Chemical analyses reveal long-distance trade routes previously known only through scattered written references. Ancient DNA studies confirm migration patterns hinted at in fragmentary historical sources. Environmental records support agricultural practices described briefly in surviving administrative documents. Different forms of evidence reinforce one another. The missing archive leaves indirect fingerprints across multiple disciplines. Artificial intelligence now assists researchers in tracing these subtle connections. Algorithms compare writing styles, vocabulary, and textual structures across enormous digital collections. Previously unnoticed relationships emerge. Fragments housed in museums thousands of kilometers apart prove to belong to the same original manuscript. Lost quotations are matched with surviving works. Ancient copying traditions become easier to reconstruct. Technology cannot restore vanished books. It can reveal the invisible networks connecting those that survive. The evidence remains incomplete, yet scholars increasingly recognize that no surviving text stands entirely alone. Every manuscript belongs to a wider ecosystem of learning. Every archive once communicated with others through trade diplomacy, scholarship, religion, or administration. Recovering those relationships sometimes proves as valuable as discovering entirely new documents. Perhaps the greatest surviving archive is civilization itself. Modern cities depend upon legal systems refined over millennia. Scientific inquiry grows from countless earlier observations. Educational institutions inherit traditions established in ancient scribale schools and philosophical academies. Libraries organize knowledge using principles recognizable to scholars living thousands of years ago. Even digital databases continue humanity's oldest ambition, to preserve memory beyond the limits of individual lives. This realization changes how the lost archive is understood. It is not simply a collection of missing books. It is a living inheritance scattered throughout the present. Every preserved law, mathematical formula, engineering principle, historical narrative, and literary tradition may contain small fragments originating in documents that no longer exist. The original shelves have vanished. The original scribes are forgotten. The manuscripts have turned to dust, yet their influence quietly persists inside ideas that continue crossing generations. The archive is therefore both absent and present at the same time, lost in its original form, still alive in countless ways that history is only beginning to recognize. The silence surrounding the ancient world is real, but hidden beneath that silence, echoes continue shaping the modern world, reminding us that knowledge often survives its own disappearance. For centuries, searching for lost archives required little more than patience, intuition, and extraordinary luck. Explorers wandered across deserts guided by local traditions. Archaeologists followed broken pottery scattered across windswept hills. Excavation often depended upon educated guesses supported by incomplete maps and fragments of ancient texts. Entire careers passed without a single major discovery, while a fortunate accident could transform historical understanding almost overnight. Today the search looks very different. The archive lost to history is increasingly pursued not only with shovels and brushes, but also with satellites orbiting hundreds of kilometers above the Earth aircraft, carrying sophisticated sensors, computers capable of recognizing invisible patterns, and laboratories able to recover information from objects once considered unreadable. The landscape itself has become an enormous historical document. High-resolution satellite imagery allows archaeologists to identify subtle changes in vegetation, soil color, and surface elevation that often indicate buried structures. Ancient roads leave faint linear traces visible only from above. Long-forgotten irrigation canals appear as slight differences in moisture retained by the ground. Foundations hidden beneath farmland reveal geometric patterns impossible to recognize while standing at ground level. Some of the world's largest archaeological discoveries during the past few decades begin not with excavation but with pixels. Researchers examining satellite images identify suspicious alignments across deserts, floodplains, and forests. Only later do field investigations confirm that the patterns represent ancient settlements, temple complexes, defensive walls, or administrative centers. Every newly identified site carries the possibility that written records may still survive beneath its ruins. Dense forests, once considered nearly impenetrable obstacles to archaeology, are yielding remarkable surprises through airborne laser scanning, commonly known as LiDAR. By sending millions of laser pulses toward the ground and filtering away vegetation, researchers create detailed maps of landscapes hidden beneath thick tree cover. The results have transformed understanding of several ancient civilizations. In Central America, vast networks of Maya cities, roads, terraces, reservoirs, and defensive structures emerge beneath jungle canopies that conceal them for centuries. Similar technologies reveal forgotten settlements across Southeast Asia and other heavily forested regions. Although organic manuscripts rarely survive in tropical climates, these discoveries dramatically expand the number of locations where future excavations may uncover inscriptions, carved monuments, or durable written records. Even deserts continue offering surprises. Ground-penetrating radar allows researchers to detect buried walls, chambers, and foundations without immediately disturbing the soil. Magnetometers identify subtle variations caused by ancient hearths, kilns, brick structures, or collapsed buildings. Electrical resistance surveys reveal underground features through differences in soil moisture. Together, these methods help archaeologists choose excavation sites with far greater precision than earlier generations could achieve. This matters because excavation itself is destructive. Once a site has been excavated, it can never return to its original state. Every trench removes part of the archaeological record. Modern archaeology therefore emphasizes careful planning, documentation, and conservation, rather than rapid exposure of buried remains. The archive deserves patience. Digital technology has also transformed the study of objects already recovered. Thousands of fragmented tablets stored in museums around the world are now photographed using extremely high-resolution imaging. Three-dimensional scanning captures microscopic details of inscriptions invisible under ordinary lighting. Multispectral photography reveals faded ink hidden beneath surface discoloration. Fragments ignored for decades suddenly become readable. Sometimes two pieces separated across different museums prove to belong to the same original document. Digital databases make such comparisons possible on an unprecedented scale. Artificial intelligence increasingly assists with these enormous collections. Machine learning systems trained on ancient scripts can identify damage signs, suggest probable restorations, and compare handwriting styles across thousands of documents. They cannot replace expert interpretation, but they dramatically accelerate tasks that once required years of manual comparison. One damaged administrative tablet may contain only a few surviving symbols. By comparing thousands of similar records, computer systems sometimes suggest likely reconstructions that archaeologists then evaluate critically. The process resembles assembling an immense puzzle, whose pieces are scattered across continents. Each new connection slightly enlarges humanity's surviving archive. Another remarkable frontier lies beneath the sea. For much of history, submerged landscapes remain inaccessible. Today, underwater archaeology investigates ancient harbours, shipwrecks, drowned settlements, and coastlines flooded after the end of the last ice age. Sidescan sonar maps the seafloor. Remotely operated vehicles explore depths impossible for divers. Photogrammetry creates detailed three-dimensional models of submerged ruins. Occasionally, these expeditions recover inscriptions, cargo manifests, or sealed containers preserving written material under unusual conditions. Most organic documents disappear quickly underwater, yet exceptional environments sometimes surprise researchers. Just as volcanic ash or desert caves preserve unexpected archives on land, unusual underwater conditions occasionally protect fragile artifacts long enough for modern science to recover them. Climate change adds urgency to this work. Rising sea levels, stronger storms, expanding deserts, melting glaciers, and accelerating coastal erosion threaten archaeological sites worldwide. Places that remain stable for centuries may now deteriorate rapidly. Some ancient settlements disappear into the sea. Others suffer increasing damage from flooding or changing groundwater conditions. Paradoxically, the same environmental changes revealing certain archaeological sites through drought or erosion simultaneously destroy others before they can be studied. The race against time has become increasingly real. Digital preservation therefore plays an expanding role. Entire monuments are scanned in 3 dimensions. Archives are photographed page by page. Inscriptions are recorded at microscopic resolution. Even if physical objects are later damaged, detailed digital records preserve much of their informational value. Humanity has entered a new stage in the history of archives. For the first time, knowledge can exist simultaneously in countless locations around the world. Unlike ancient libraries concentrated inside single buildings, digital collections can be copied endlessly. One disaster no longer threatens every copy, yet new vulnerabilities emerge. Digital storage depends upon electricity, software, compatibility, hardware, maintenance, cybersecurity, and constant migration to newer technologies. The lesson of ancient archives remains relevant. No storage system is permanent without continual care. Scholars still debate how many major discoveries remain waiting beneath unexplored landscapes. Some estimate that only a small percentage of archaeological sites have been scientifically excavated. Others emphasize that many important locations now lie beneath modern cities, where excavation opportunities are extremely limited. The evidence remains incomplete. The greatest archive still hidden may never be recovered. Nevertheless, each passing year demonstrates that history continues yielding extraordinary surprises. A forgotten inscription emerges from a temple wall. A sealed room appears beneath collapsing architecture. A fragment ignored in museum storage reveals unexpected historical connections. A damaged scroll becomes readable through techniques unimaginable only decades earlier. The search continues not because archaeologists expect to recover everything, but because every recovered fragment changes the story. Every new discovery reminds humanity that the past is far larger than the surviving record suggests. Some voices are gone forever. Others remain just beyond reach, waiting beneath layers of earthstone, ash water, or time itself. The archive lost to history has not completely surrendered its secrets. It continues revealing them slowly, one patient discovery at a time. The farther historians look into the past, the more they encounter an unexpected truth. The greatest archive ever assembled is not hidden inside a single palace, buried beneath one desert, or sealed within the ruins of a legendary library. It exists as the accumulated memory of countless civilizations, each preserving only a fragment of humanity's experience before passing that fragment forward or losing it forever. This realization changes the meaning of loss. For generations, people have searched for one mythical repository that might restore everything time has taken away. Legends speak of hidden chambers beneath pyramids, forgotten vaults beneath ancient cities, secret monasteries guarding forbidden manuscripts, or immense underground libraries waiting to be discovered intact. Such stories endure because they promise a comforting possibility. Somewhere perhaps nothing has truly been forgotten. Archaeology offers a different lesson. The evidence suggests that no single archive could ever contain the total memory of civilization. Every kingdom records its own perspective. Every city preserves local traditions. Every language captures ideas that resist perfect translation. Every generation chooses what deserves copying and what quietly fades into obscurity. Humanity's memory has always been distributed. That distribution makes civilization both remarkably resilient and profoundly fragile. When one archive disappears, others sometimes preserve echoes of its contents. Yet no surviving collection can fully replace what has been lost. Imagine standing before an immense mosaic composed of millions of tiny stones. Now imagine that most of those stones have gradually disappeared over thousands of years. The remaining pieces still reveal portions of the original image. Certain figures remain recognizable. Some landscapes can still be identified. Patterns emerge. Relationships become visible. But enormous gaps separate every surviving fragment. Historians spend their careers studying the spaces as carefully as the pieces themselves. Silence becomes evidence. Absence acquires meaning. The missing archive shapes history almost as much as the surviving one. Every generation of researchers inherits both knowledge and uncertainty. New excavations recover forgotten rulers. Ancient DNA reveals unexpected migrations. Climate records explain mysterious societal changes. Improved dating techniques refine long-accepted chronologies. Artificial intelligence identifies connections between fragmented manuscripts scattered across continents. Each discovery enlarges humanity's understanding. At the same time, each answer exposes additional questions. The horizon continually moves farther away. This is not failure. It is the natural condition of historical inquiry. The archive lost to history cannot be reconstructed completely, because the very evidence required for complete reconstruction has itself disappeared. Yet incompleteness does not diminish the value of what survives. In many ways it enhances it. A single administrative tablet recording grain deliveries suddenly becomes precious, because it illuminates an entire economy, otherwise hidden from view. A personal letter acquires extraordinary significance because it preserves an ordinary voice that history rarely allows us to hear. A damaged astronomical text becomes invaluable because it extends a sequence of observations by only a few decades. Every fragment carries weight far beyond its size. Modern civilization often assumes that digital technology has solved the ancient problem of forgetting. Billions of documents can now be stored in spaces smaller than a human hand. Entire libraries fit inside portable devices. Copies can be transmitted across oceans in seconds. Information appears almost indestructible. History encourages caution. Every civilization has believed its own methods of preserving knowledge were sufficient. Clay tablets seemed durable. Papyrus represented remarkable innovation. Parchment expanded possibilities. Paper transformed literacy. Printing multiplied survival. Digital storage revolutionized access. Each advance solved previous limitations while introducing entirely new vulnerabilities. Ancient scribes worried about insects' moisture and fire. Modern archivists confront cyber attacks, hardware failure, software obsolescence, electromagnetic damage, and the constant challenge of transferring information between changing technological systems. The underlying responsibility remains unchanged. Knowledge survives only when people actively preserve it. This continuity creates an unexpected connection across thousands of years. A Mesopotamian scribe carefully drying fresh clay before placing a tablet upon a shelf performs essentially the same task as a modern archivist verifying digital backups. Their tools differ completely. Their purpose is identical. Both understand that memory cannot defend itself. Someone must protect it. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden within the archive lost to history. Civilization is not defined solely by monuments, armies, wealth, or political power. It is defined by the willingness to remember, every law copied, every scientific observation recorded, every poem preserved, every map updated, every family history written down, every language taught to another generation. Together, these quiet acts create the invisible foundation upon which every society stands. When they cease, forgetting begins long before buildings collapse. Looking across the ancient world today, the surviving ruins appear strangely peaceful. Columns stand beneath open skies. Temple walls glow beneath evening sunlight. Broken statues rest where they fall centuries ago. Visitors often experience these places through silence. Yet that silence is deceptive. Beneath every ruined city lie conversations interrupted but not entirely erased. Administrative decisions once debated by officials. Students practicing unfamiliar scripts. Astronomers marking the passage of planets. Merchants recording distant transactions. Parents writing wills. Priests preserving rituals. Physicians describing illnesses. Poets searching for the right words. Most of those voices no longer reach us directly. Some survive only as fragments. Others persist through ideas carried into later civilizations. Many have vanished completely, and still enough remains to remind humanity that the past was infinitely richer than the surviving evidence alone suggests. Every excavation continues the conversation. Every deciphered inscription restores another sentence. Every recovered manuscript widens the narrow bridge connecting the present with the deep past. The archive lost to history may never be found in its entirety. Perhaps it never truly existed as a single place. Instead, it lives in scattered fragments beneath deserts, forests, river valleys, volcanic ash, monastery walls, museum storerooms, forgotten caves, and underwater ruins. It also lives within every modern effort to preserve knowledge against time. As long as humanity continues searching, translating, protecting, and learning, the archive is never entirely gone. Its missing pages remain missing. Its surviving pages continue growing. The story is unfinished, and perhaps that is exactly as history has always intended. The ancient world leaves behind no complete record of itself. It leaves impressions, fragments, echoes carried across thousands of years by stone, clay, ink, and extraordinary coincidence. Between those surviving traces stretches an immeasurable silence, not empty, but filled with lives that unfold as completely as our own before gradually slipping beyond memory. The missing archive reminds us that history is never simply a collection of dates or monuments. It is the fragile act of remembering repeated generation after generation until one generation can no longer continue the task. Across deserts where wind smooths the outlines of forgotten cities, beneath forests that quietly reclaim abandoned temples, and under layers of earth covering long-collapsed libraries, time continues its patient work. Some discoveries still wait beneath the surface. Others have already disappeared beyond recovery. Yet every recovered tablet, every deciphered inscription, every restored manuscript proves that the conversation between past and present has never truly ended. It merely grows quieter in some places and unexpectedly louder in others. The greatest lesson of the lost archive may be neither tragedy nor mystery, but continuity. Civilizations rise, believing their achievements will last forever. They build monuments, write laws, map the stars, and preserve stories for descendants they will never meet. Most eventually fade. Their buildings collapse. Their languages change. Their archives shrink. And still pieces endure. An idea survives in another culture. A mathematical insight reappears centuries later. A forgotten observation becomes the foundation for a future discovery. Memory rarely survives intact, but it often survives enough. Looking at the world today surrounded by technologies unimaginable to the ancient scribes, it becomes easier to appreciate how closely their hopes resemble our own. They wish to protect knowledge from time. We continue pursuing the same goal with different tools. Their archives remind us that preservation is never automatic. It is always a choice renewed by each generation. As the last light fades across ruined walls and silent courtyards, the archive lost to history remains both absent and present. Much has vanished forever, yet enough survives to remind us how vast humanity's shared memory truly is. Somewhere beneath the next hill, beneath another layer of sand, beneath the floor of an abandoned building, or inside a forgotten cave, another fragment may still be waiting. Until then, the silence itself becomes part of the story, inviting patience, curiosity, and respect for the countless voices that carried civilization forward before gently passing into history.